Go ahead.
Welcome to TechWhirl's Fast Five discussions, and thank you for joining us for today's show. My name's Al Martine, and today we're talking about overcoming fears for migrating for XML and DITA for technical communications. This is a major company transformation. It impacts people, processes, and technologies. So it's completely understandable that there's a lot of apprehension, curiosity, and even if you're making a major decision and you're about to impact all of your documentation, a good bit of fear. On our show today, to help us better understand XML and overcome some of these fears, is Maxwell Hoffmann, Adobe's evangelist for all things technical communication, specifically focusing on the Technical Communication Suite 5 line of products. It's hard not to recognize Maxwell if you've ever been to a TechCom conference or attended an Adobe webinar in the last few years. He is ever present all over the globe, it seems. But he hasn't always been with Adobe, he hasn't always been with Technical Communication Suite or any of these products. He actually started out as an ad agency graphic artist, worked for several software vendors, including Interleaf and Frame Technology, where he's the product manager and eventually the director of worldwide sales training. He returned to high-volume production, working with translation localization sector for about a dozen years. By his best estimate, Maxwell has viewed or touched over 1 million pages of other people's work in all sorts of formats: Word, Quark, InDesign, regular Framemaker, and frequently DITA or XML, which gets him on our show today. In his private time, Maxwell collects and appraises mid-century antiques with an emphasis on Art Deco through the Mad Men period. Maxwell, thank you so much for joining us today. How's everything going?
Great, thank you so much. I'm joining you from Portland, Oregon, and I'm in my kitchen just because the lighting is quite a bit better than my office. I don't normally work with that telephone behind me.
It could be hard for the conference call. I could really see you crank the whole thing. It could be really quite difficult.
Yeah, if that phone rings, I don't want to answer it. Let me put it
That's it. From the great beyond, yes.
Yeah.
So mid-century antiques. First, and this one's not on our, but talk through what that really means. It was obviously last century, and also you do some of the amateur appraisal. What would be the most valuable piece you've ever appraised?
Actually, well, I could have had a visual object with me. Actually, it would be a type of cut crystal that's called brilliant, like the word brilliant. And from the 1870s up to about 1917, a lot of cut crystal was created in the United States, and the quality was actually superior to anything done in Europe. That's not known anymore. That's kind of forgotten. And that crystal is actually an unusual material that is partway between solid and liquid. Very, very delicate, and it took 9 to 10 days to hand carve patterns into that. So I have had times that somebody thought they had pressed glass and they had one of those pieces, and with no chips on it, it could be worth well over $3,000.
Oh, wow.
So earlier, when we were doing the pre-shows, you're kind of getting everything set, make sure Google Plus was set. You had showed us, you were talking about, I think it was a teacup or something like that. Can you talk about that just a little bit? That was pretty cool into
Sure.
How it had changed.
Yeah, well, actually, first of all, the collecting that I do, I actually use almost everything I collect. It's not on display. This first piece, some people will recognize. This is Corningware, and
oh my God, I remember those.
its heyday was about 1958 into the mid 70s. I think that cup was made up to about 1980. However, something a lot of people don't realize is that dinnerware in China was very, very big in terms of American-made products during and after the war, World War II. And one of the reasons for that was that despite all of the modest rationing that went on in the United States, the only thing really required to create China was natural gas and some type of sand or dirt, and there was no shortage on that. So anyway, this particular pattern I'm holding up here, which some people find fun and playful, is called Starburst. You can guess why. And believe it or not, this was the most popular bridal registry pattern in 1954, which was the year it was introduced. And this was, there were a lot of things out, lots of patterns. People had starbursts on top of supermarket signs, drive-ins, car washes, and all of this nuclear stuff virtually disappeared in October 1962, or actually in 1963. And can you take a wild guess why that might have been? Like, what would have made people not want nuclear things on their plates?
Mention of the microwave.
Yeah, time's up. Yeah, no, actually, it was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and a lot of people, of course, that's beyond memory for most people, but the Cuban Missile Crisis, actually, we did come pretty close to the brink. It wasn't just a, you know, Kennedy didn't blink thing or whatever. And so a lot of people weren't that comfortable with nuclear stuff after that, and the most popular pattern by 1964 was this. And everything started to go into floral, flowers, kind of all natural stuff. And ironically, this presaged Flower Power of 1967. A lot of the designs that the hippies embraced actually were retreads of Art Nouveau from the turn of the previous century and the teens. So it's kind of, so to summarize, the reason I find this interesting is we go to museums to look at ancient Greek and Etruscan vases, to look at the images that some civilization put on there. What did that mean? And someday, thousands of years from now, somebody is going to be looking at this and be speculating about what type of civilization was so fascinated with this that they actually put it on a coffee cup.
Agreed.
Yep, that's my hobby.
Well, cool. Thank you for sharing it. That's pretty cool. At some point we'll compare notes on antiques. My grandmother collected a ton of them, and we have from all the way from the 20s up to the 70s. So we'll have to compare some notes because she was really knew what she was doing. I not so much. So maybe you can give me a guide or two. All right. And as always, helping me ask the questions is our editor for TechWhirl, my business partner as well, Connie Giordano. Welcome as well. We're on another one of these calls and being able to help out. But we are, so how goes the world of technology, strategy, and communications on our FAIR website?
On our FAIR website, it's just busy. We have a new poll question out that is on the appropriate amount of video to use in your technical communications plans. And this is one of the more popular questions we've had. We started it last week, and we've already gotten 30 people voting. It's not a big poll, but it is fun to just sort of see where people's thoughts are going on these things. We just published a new column this morning from Fabiano Sid, our localization guru, on "Fail is the New Black." It's a really nice article, and definitely encourage folks to do that. And of course, there are always interesting battles and discussions going on over in the mailing list and in the community forums. And one of the big topics right now is new job titles. That one comes up every so often. So content engineer and content designer are the big new things. So
new names are the new black. Okay, yes. Fair enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just don't call me late for dinner was what that come from. So, all right, and the last person who is not on the show but is actually helping us take the public notes, Jill Parman, is typing today. I don't think she's probably typing any of this stuff yet, but she is also helping out. So we appreciate her taking some time away from her busy schedule as well. So before we start, this one is on migrating to XML and DITA. You're watching this show, and if by some chance you're evaluating, looking at this migration, but you're starting to look at considering a new product. Now, maybe what you're using right now, maybe you're in Word, it's time to make the move into structured authoring or be able to do something a little bit more robust. We really encourage you to take a look at the Technical Communications Suite 5 from Adobe. You'd be remiss not to. It is used by Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 1000 companies around the globe. Fantastic user base, fantastic support, good training, etc., and so forth. So it's a 30-day free trial, so there's no money out of pocket to at least give it a shot. You can certainly reach out to Maxwell and the entire Adobe team. They are one of our largest partners, and they have been with TechWhirl before Connie and I were with TechWhirl. They graciously supported some of the alterations we made without very kindly not having those calls. And for all that, we appreciate it. And as you watch, we're gonna be talking about XML and DITA on this, but take a little bit of time and reach out. Big square if you're on our website. If you're on the YouTube one, we'll obviously head over to TechWhirl. But big partner, appreciate it, and everything they've done for us. So on to the Fast 5 discussions. Not a clever name. We're going to have 5 big questions that we're going to ask Max. If you're curious what those questions are, go on to the actual TechWhirl page that has this broadcast on it. You're going to see like public notes. Click on it, and that will give you the questions we're going to ask in the order we're going to ask them, and we'll go from there. We also have questions for folks who signed up for our little reminder. We're going to try to put all of those in. We have a ton of stuff to talk about, even in those 5 questions. Sometimes we're worried about too little content. Not this time. But Maxwell has agreed to do a little bit of a write-up for each one of those questions. We will post these on TechWhirl and do what we can to try to get it back to the people who asked those questions. And finally, but not, we'll be monitoring the hashtag TWFast5 and Twitter. And any question that comes through there, we'll try to ask those in the process of the show. And then we'll bake all these into the Google Doc, and we'll always do a write-up at the end to, one, put this back out into the ether, but also to help out everybody who have these questions. So I think it's probably time to actually dive into it. So Connie, do you want to take the first question for us?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Hi, Maxwell. I wanted to talk a little bit in the first question. You wrote about overcoming the fear factor during migration to XML DITA for the ISTC. And so what we wanted to kind of concentrate on this morning is finding out a little bit about what are those fears that companies express when they're considering migrating to XML and DITA, and whether or not those are realistic fears.
Sure, absolutely. And I believe that we have a link to that article. So
yes, we do.
Yeah. It's not a long article. I encourage people to read it. In that article, what I was talking about was that the perception of DITA has really evolved radically, DITA specifically, over about the last, I'd say, 7 years. And the point of it was that 7 years ago, which in a way was not that long ago, although, you know, if you go back to 2007, I think we were living in a different world. People drove different cars, financed homes differently. It's kind of like comparing 1928 to 1934, maybe. But anyway, the point being that authoring tools and also tools for managing DITA, I don't think were quite as accessible or as friendly as they are today. So as a result of that, up to about 7 years ago, there were a lot of many consultants who spoke at conferences, many of which I attended, had what I call the pith helmet syndrome. In other words, it was the brave explorer who had just come out of the jungle, wearing a pith helmet, and I have found a path through here where I will take you by the hand and I will lead you around the sand pits and the snakes and all these scary things that might happen because you really, really need me and you need to pay me lots of money to help you get where you need to go. Consultants are still important, and I recommend using consultants. But the reason this was kind of scary 7 years ago is many people had a acquaintance, or they knew another company who had often spent six figures on a pilot project. They didn't always go that far, and the reason was there were some people around during that period of time who were making way more money on consulting than they were on software licenses. So, in a nutshell, a lot of people had heard horror stories about XML or DITA, about how hard it was, how difficult it was, and I think that the kind of old-fashioned perception of DITA was there was this real long time getting set up, and then after 6 weeks or 6 months, you finally started to see something appear on a screen or coming out of a piece of paper. That's not that realistic anymore, and it's really changed quite a bit. And I'll just touch on my own product as an example. There are others as well, but as an example, Adobe Framemaker actually has a built-in DITA application, literally out of the box, that without doing anything, you can actually start publishing. If you want to start publishing with a generic, typical-looking a DITA project, you really don't need to modify anything. The most somebody might need to do is do a little bit of company branding if they want to have their company logo and a header or footer. So what's really different today that I think can take away the fear factor is that with products like the one that I just mentioned, it's now possible for the first time to do a download and actually have hands-on with a full-blown working solution without any consulting and without any setup time. And I think that's really important. It's a little bit like test driving a car before you drive it. You know, the old approach to DITA years ago would be, I'll create a mental picture. It would be as if you went into a car showroom and you were looking at a model of a car that you were interested in, and suddenly the sales assistant opened up the hood and started showing you where the spark plugs were and how to check the oil and wiring diagrams for you know, what would go wrong if the air conditioning stopped working, and all of this would have happened before you ever got inside the automobile. You hadn't sat behind the wheel yet, and that obviously could cool your enthusiasm about a car, you know, or about any type of solution. So that's one of the main reasons. I think the two biggest fears were cost and expense. One, and I think the second one was time, particularly ramp-up time or training time. Many people will remember back on how long it took them to get where they are. You know, whether they're using Microsoft Word or whether they're using an older version of Framemaker or some competitive product. Some people have invested a lot of time in mastering the skills that they have today, and they think that the next big thing they do is going to be going back from scratch, you know, to a blank sheet of paper and doing all of this ramp-up time. And fortunately, because of the very strong support community and also social media, you know, there's just so much more information available now online, actually in like Hangouts like this, thousands of hours of video, you know, that can give you really a really good sense and a really good visual picture. It's not as scary as it was. But to kind of summarize the whole point of this is, what I would say is, as you begin your journey into migrating into DITA or XML, I think the most important thing is to actually have a simulation. Have some hands-on first. Drive the car. Just find out, what does it feel like to get behind the wheel, and what does it feel like to actually author and create something that has some intelligence and value that makes your final content more searchable and of more use to your end consumers.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's...
I'm trying to look at the clock.
All right. Cool. So
I'm trying to go like, you know, I should have the clock over the screen.
No, and that's absolutely, and I think one of your point of the technical side of this, try it out, right? The try before you buy. Jackie Samuels, who does a lot of writing on DITA and XML for us, she put together one of her articles had just screenshots of what it actually looked like.
Yeah.
And we got more feedback. You know, people had bought books on DITA and all these various guides, and that article got more feedback, positive feedback, just on the fact that people finally got to see it. It's like the unicorn. We finally got to see it in its, you know, natural habitat.
Yeah.
Fears on the technical side, fears on the creation side, really only one-third of the overall picture. The people, the processes, the technologies. Business decision makers looking at this migration, talking about the change management side of it, what are some of the specific fears that you know happen, and then how we could address them for the entire enterprise?
Certainly. And before I answer your question, Al, I just want to mention that I'm not trying to be coy, tilting my head and showing my dimple a lot like that. It's that I have these incredible glasses that create drive-in movies. I'm wearing polarized transition lenses, and unfortunately, selfies are out because just any kind of screen, it's very distracting. If I make eye contact with the camera, I'm going to look like this. So that's why I'm doing this.
We had thought that was sort of Adobe's new Google Glass-like thing, where they were already putting the XML right there in front of you.
There is this is data, and I can actually drag and drop elements of it.
That's live feedback on the PDF. This is we're sharing a little bit about TCS 6, but we.
Well, anyway, getting serious again. To answer your question about business decision makers and change management. There's actually two levels of fear there. The first one is not real closely related to what you asked, but important, and the second one is closely related to what you asked. The one that's maybe not terribly close to what you asked, but it's important, is that a lot of what I would call profit center stakeholders, the people who actually own the budget, and this might be up almost to the vice president level or director level, the person who's going to have their head on the line as to does this work or not. Sometimes this is kind of specifically American. Sometimes in American corporate culture, there are some people who float just up above middle management, and there is a fear there of being held accountable if things don't work. And so as a result of that, I've found I've encountered some cases where some managers want either a company or a consultant to say, this is the answer, you must do these steps. And then if it doesn't work, they can say, hey, that guy told me to do that. That's what they told me to do. Now, that sounds really ridiculous and immature, but it happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, rather than explore their own needs and then have some self-actualization through the internal stakeholders and find out we tested this, yes, it did work, we agree that this is a good solution, we had hands-on, we really liked it. Many's the time that I've seen cases where everybody on the team wanted perhaps a Framemaker-like solution, something that was friendlier, and they were actually steered into something that was more complicated because some consultants came in with white shirts and ties and very, very effectively convinced this person that no, you will not get in trouble for following these steps. In terms of change management, I would say that the migration to DITA or XML is really not going to involve any more complexity or any more risk in change management than anything else. I think to put DITA and XML in perspective, let's just step back away from it for a second. And actually, ironically, today I believe is the day that Apple is making one of their big announcements. There's some sort of yet another product line coming out from Apple. Okay. We all know that we're not going to be using the same smartphones or the same tablets 10 years from now that we're using now. They will be replaced by something completely new. And the original smartphones will someday look as quaint as stereopticons. They'll probably seem that limited at some point in time. So the real issue with change management is no one can afford to sit still and cling to either one file format or one workflow just because we have this database in effect, and this is the way that we're managing change management today. That would be a little bit like with my mid-century stuff, flashing back to Mad Men in the 1960s, and we have this incredible filing system. We have these numbers on the wall that actually tell us which file folder to go to, and all the numbers are there, and there's no problem. You can just find anything that you want to, and then somehow bypassing all of the evolutionary jumps that first happened with word processors and then with computers and then eventually with the internet and being able to do collaboration as we did with this session when we were all viewing the same file. So although that might sound like a really exaggerated scenario, there are some people out there that are virtually doing that in terms of change management or how they're creating content. They're feeling that we have this thing that works, we're going to hang on to it, we can't afford any downtime. And actually, I think to assuage or to overcome that fear, anytime that you move into something new, be it DITA, XML, or whatever, you're always going to do it progressively in stages. You're not just going to shut down shop and have no new information released for 6 months while you move everything over, and then all of a sudden, it's not like a store being closed and being remodeled and suddenly you have a grand reopening. It's going to happen in stages. Another visual here locally in Portland, I happen to shop, this is not a product pitch, Max Hoffmann, private citizen. I happen to do my grocery shopping at Fred Meyer. It's a real nice big all-in-one store that has everything you want. They went through a major remodel, huge, and they stayed open while they were doing that. They basically did it in stages, so there was about 1/3 of the store that was noisy and full of stuff that you kind of stayed away from, And it was kind of a similar experience to migrating to XML or DITA or what you would do with change management, in that everything was on a different aisle and everything was someplace new. And they handled that change really well by having extra people standing around who had T-shirts that said, "Ask me where it is." And in stages, shoppers became accustomed to finding information in new locations. And actually, the final store layout was far superior to the old one. This could have been a really negative experience. You might have thought some people would walk through the door and see all this construction and say, "Oh my God, I'm not going to go here. This is really scary." Ironically, it actually built up a lot of customer loyalty. People felt more engaged. They felt that the staff was really working with them and that they had something to do with where things were. And I think that's very similar to the process that you go through with change management. The ultimate thing in terms of managing change management, once you have completed your migration to DITA and XML, there's going to be more intelligence embedded below the sentence level or below the paragraph level with whatever you're creating. And because of that additional intelligence, which comes through attributes and elements, think of it as metadata, just some type of hidden attribute that labels the purpose of an object, it literally will create as much of a change in your life as smartphones did. You know, the fact that you can hold one device that will allow you to watch movies, read email, do face-to-face conferencing. It's hard to imagine not having that in our lives, and that showed up about 7 years ago as well. So I know I rambled a little bit, but I hope that gave you some sense of where I think the fears are, and that as with a supermarket very intelligently handling complex change over 6 to 9 months, it's not that scary, and it can be a very positive thing.
Yeah, and no, that makes a lot of sense, and the analogy for the supermarket is quite good, and I've worked in change management a fair amount, and it's a lot of those things you said bear out across, and you know they gave you signs, they told you it was coming, right? The change, they gave you directions on how to get around it, and in one of the things, a couple thoughts as we're managers, you know who you are on this. As you make the decision and you put 99% of the budget into the tech, which you should, but the people side of change is the win or loss. And 80, I forget the statistic, like 85% of IT failures, transformation failures, occur on the people side, not because the tech wasn't installed correctly or configured.
Yes.
Some other aspects before we move on, I know time's ticking on us, is the expectations managers have in the review process for the technical writers and those using the new tool need to be revised so there's no fear and they don't try to kill it. Communications, and then training. Train. Early, often, and afterward. The other problem is this thing starts running a little behind, budgets get tight. They first, I've told a lot of technical communicators over time, like, congratulations, you now know the one group of people who get blown off a project before the technical writers, and that's the change management folks. You keep like the lone trainer. But train it, and don't cheap out on this part of it, because inevitably you're not going to get the results if your folks aren't getting it. And it is, I have to imagine the return on investment is exponential, where it just 1 minute it's like, this is okay, and then boom, and it really goes out the door. So,
absolutely.
Very cool. Okay, Connie, we'll slide over to the next cue.
I want to continue with that grocery store analogy, because I think it is very useful to help people understand it and maybe in and of itself take some of the fear out. I sort of have this picture in my mind, because we do have a large chain here in Charlotte that did a similar kind of thing when they were going through some remodeling stuff. There have got to be some groups that are going to be like the old man in your neighborhood who's always hollering at the kids to get off the lawn. When they walk in the grocery store and they see all of this stuff, and all they're going to do is complain about it. So and holler at whoever's got the T-shirt on that says "Ask me where it is." Want to know, why did you bother to change that? I liked it where it was. So there's got to be there have to be stakeholders in a process of this migration who are going to be more resistant than others, because it is an enterprise commitment. The whole store is changing over to this new layout.
Yeah.
So what are the ones that tend to be more resistant than others, and what do you do to kind of move them along towards the into the light?
Yeah, that's Connie. That's as you were saying that I was running back through my mind memories both of DITA and XML projects, and even before DITA XML, just going back to because I've been around that long, I was even thinking back to the advent of desktop publishing, which was once a new thing.
Oh yeah.
When you think about it, when I mean, we all at least know the history of it, whether we were there or not. Once the Macintosh came out, and it was the first time there was the first time there was an affordable desktop. There, of course, had been one around since Xerox Palo Alto Research Center Park. What the Macintosh made go mainstream was a concept that had been around for maybe 15 years, I guess, but it cost $40,000 or $50,000 a seat, and so I was thinking back to some of the changes that happened then, and I think the answer might surprise you. This is what I've observed pretty consistently, and I think a lot of this has to, in terms of the stakeholders who resist or sometimes get threatened, some of it has to do with political power, and also very much it's very much influenced by corporate culture, which can be quite different. I'm sure I think all of us have had a job at one time in our careers where we worked in what we might have thought was a toxic corporate culture, where very political, perhaps a lot of negativity, watch your back, that sort of thing. One group of stakeholders that I've seen sometimes be a real roadblock, and very, very unnecessarily, believe it or not, is the IT department. And that really comes as a surprise, because when you think about it, who would have a better understanding of a database, or a better understanding of something that benefits coming from a code level, or who works more with metadata than IT? And very closely related to IT, maybe almost at a one level down or parallel to that, I would also say would be engineers. Engineers who are actually developing the product, usually software, but it could be something else. Perhaps they're developing air conditioning controls or something. A lot of engineers get very set in their ways in terms of what their toolkit is. And I think that I've worked very closely with many engineers. I used to be the product manager for Framemaker many years ago, and probably spent 80% of my time working with developers. And any of us who've worked with people who are gifted at writing code know that sometimes people whose minds work that well with mathematics sometimes have a different personality. They sometimes have a different way of expressing themselves. And I guess the most diplomatic thing I would say is it's not. Sometimes some of these brilliant engineers, she might not always be the first person to come to mind if you're going on a sales call to take with you, because there's not the same amount of censoring going through before information is transmitted.
That is so kind. I'm going to watch this and write that down again.
And of course,
I'm sorry to interrupt. That was
sure. No. And also, why are engineers this way? Okay. There also has sometimes been some controversy about engineers, and why do we have all this offshoring? Why are all these engineering jobs going overseas? I've heard so many people complain about that, and I have a very logical answer for that. Okay, if we all close our eyes and pause, think back to 6th grade, wherever that was, and think about that you're in class with your classmates, and you're doing whatever you were doing with possibly pre-algebra of mathematics that time. Okay, let's say that you had 38 kids in your class. I had about 4. I was a baby boomer, so I had like 42 kids in my class. And stop and think about how many kids in that class had a natural aptitude towards math. How many of them really had that gift of just grasping what you do with numbers? And I've asked this question over and over, and the answer is usually 3 to 5. Okay, so what that really means is that somewhere around 10% of the children in the room had a natural aptitude. I think that anybody can be taught to write code just as anybody can be taught to play the piano. I took piano lessons, and I was really quite good. I had no aptitude for it whatsoever. I was like a monkey on the keyboard. I was literally just memorizing where the fingers went, and I was almost like a player piano. I could duplicate what they wanted to do, but there was no personality, there was no expression. I had no reason to be there, so I stopped doing it. Now, because of that, because there was this relatively small group of people who are, say, born with the gift to be engineers, we don't have enough people in the United States to fill all these positions. Sometimes people come from other countries because some countries have 1 billion people, therefore they have over 100 million people that are good at writing code, and where the United States might have 35 million people that are good at writing code. So be that as that may, let's just get down to the human level of the individual person. These people who write code, it's a very isolated job. They have to work alone between themselves on the screen and the code for a long, long time, and they probably have less patience than anybody for either learning a new process. Amazingly enough, a huge majority of these people, engineers, are used to either creating some content input or reviewing it with Microsoft Word. And why? Just because that happens to be the software that came for free on their computer. It's just what they're used to. It used to be Emacs or Numax or some type of Unix-based text editor. And I did not mean to ramble this much, but here's the irony. I've known people who will get to the point where they've got this really terrific solution, and it comes to the part where the engineers need to become involved and do something, either authoring with some sort of lightweight version of XML or doing some sort of a review process. And many times the engineers will put their foot down and say, this is not acceptable. This is not how we do things. We just don't use this tool. However, they're very dictatorial in what they will allow. So as an example, engineers, of course, use some sort of source code control, and engineers also have very stiff deadlines. At some point in time, there is a code freeze. Perhaps 6 weeks before the product's released, somebody can't just walk in and suggest a change. But sometimes the engineers feel like they should be able to do that with the tech doc people, or the people who are creating the marketing materials or whatever. They somehow feel that they have the purview to walk in and make changes at the last time. These aren't bad people. They're not ignorant or rude. They just don't know any better. That's just their world. So what do you do about that? When you have some stakeholders like that are resistant to that type of change or are perhaps blocking the project, you need kind of the equivalent to a carrot or sugar. And what that is something with the solution that's going to give them an instant benefit. Where suddenly it is just it's so much more dramatically better than it was before. One thing that comes to mind to me with DITA XML, and again, this happens to be in Framemaker, but there are some other products that do this as well, is with most XML solutions, XML authoring can have what's called context-sensitive formatting. So for instance, just visualize that you have 3 levels of nested lists. Maybe it starts out with bullets, the second level goes to dashes, and the third level goes to asterisks. Okay, and each list is contained inside of another. If I'm down here, and I'm trying to do this backwards on the screen, if I'm down here at the asterisk list, I can take an element and I can drag it up here to the level that started out with bullets, and that list item will automatically change to a bulleted list without any tagging and without any code. And for most people, the first time they experience that, it's really kind of magic. It's one of those aha moments, like something that's, it's like being able to hold a smartphone for the first time and say, where's the nearest pizza, and have it understand what you said and actually give you an intelligent response. So that's a key thing, I think, with each stakeholder is going to have a different sweet spot, a different hot spot, or different buttons to push. It's pretty easy to determine what that is. And so it's very, very important that early on in your solution or your hands-on or your exploration that each one of these groups very, very early on has a hands-on experience with something that matters to them. Not just something that matters to the people who create the content. And I think that's possibly the #1 mistake some people make, is not doing that.
Gotcha. So from your experience, what's the success rate for an XML DITA migration effort? And when the companies are setting this up, right, success is often defined by the metrics.
Yeah.
What goals and how do you measure that success?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, and this, by the way, this is truly not a sales pitch. I'm just going to direct you to, it's probably one of the resources I shared with Connie. We have a microsite, a website, I believe it's called authorxml.com, I believe. I hope. I can't type it in. But anyway,
let me see.
Yeah. Anyway, we have created a website that has nothing but resources devoted to understanding XML. And one of the things that's actually built into there is a return on investment calculator. Now, this isn't really just Framemaker specific. Some of it is like what will happen after you get into XML and after you get into DITA. And the return on investment is quite remarkable. my good friend Marcia Reifer Johnston, who wrote Word Up, and she frequently teaches classes on writing shorter and writing simpler so that you have less text to be translated. The file structure of XML and DITA, because it's basically topic or component based, it means that your what you would think of as a document can be assembled out of pieces. I'm going to have to stop using my hand because it hypnotizes me when I look at it. So anyway, these elements or components which can be reused, and a good example is, let's say that it's a paragraph that's a caution or a warning or something like that. You very often you'll have identical text and a caution or warning that's used 1,100 times over 100,000 what would have been pages or something like that. If that's only translated once, one time, and then if you multiply the lack of 1,099 times that you don't retranslate it or have someone look at it, that's a massive savings, huge. I mean, it can literally go into millions of dollars. In terms of the success rate, what I would say, Al, is that, and Connie, I would say that the success rate is always quite dramatic. But there's a reason that people may not realize that, or that somebody might not come to that same conclusion. The reason is that your return on investment, or the moment that you really tip the scales and all of a sudden start really cutting down costs, maybe as much as 80%, very often that might be 18 months later. It's just due to the nature of the beast, not just the complexity of XML, but due to the number of parts involved, due to the number of assets, due to the number of graphics, probably due to the inconsistency in how the content was created in the first place. It very often can take about up to 18 months to get everything thoroughly running the way you want to, covering all of the content you're creating that's going to go to marketing, that's going to sales, that perhaps is going to go to responsive layout on different screens, all of this. We might be looking at a year and a half. Now, why is that a problem? Well, one of the problems with that is if any company or enterprise is publicly held, if it has stock, and I work for one and I work for several, I'm proud to say that Adobe does not fall into this category. Let me make this disclaimer. My experience has been that Adobe has a tremendous vision, and I think we never look less than 2 years ahead, if not 10 years ahead, as to where people are going to be and where we should be. But there are a lot of companies that some of the key stakeholders, managers, tend to look forward about one financial quarter at a time, and everything's really based on how many sales we make in this quarter and in the next quarter. What's the profit and loss in this quarter and then the next quarter? And so they will sometimes apply that very short telescope to something like migration to XML and DITA. And to use another quick metaphor, I don't remember this, I'm just grabbing something out of the air, but after World War II, in the 1950s, it was decided that America needed a highway system. There wasn't one. There was nostalgic Route 66, but in the late 1940s, early 1950s, it was quite an ordeal to drive across America. There was no equivalent to a freeway. It did not exist, and all of this was built by tax dollars. In less than 10 years, really by about 1960, there was a very complete highway system that covered, the continental United States. That, of course, took a lot of effort. It took a lot of money, but the benefits couldn't be questioned. I mean, suddenly, that's one of the reasons that car sales went to where they were. It's one of the reasons we had such a car-based culture in the 1960s, because there were fewer people, and it really was kind of a magic experience to be able to go 75 miles an hour down the 405 freeway. In Southern California, which maybe you could do at 3 in the morning, I'm not sure. So that return on investment, it is always dramatic as long as the stakeholders and as long as everybody's educated to allow a realistic period of time for full completion. You certainly need to have some milestones, and you certainly need to have something happen that's making an improvement. And generally, through language translation, that will happen pretty quickly. What I often find is that before a migration to XML is complete, and to make a quick disclaimer, my experience has been with Framemaker. Usually, it's less than 18 months. Sometimes it's as little as 6 months that somebody has this dramatic return on investment that we're talking about. But usually the initial benefits will happen on the authoring side. Just the fact that people can turn content around much more quickly. Perhaps a lot of complex changes or additions to documentation that used to take 6 weeks might take a week and a half. You know, that might be a typical difference in turnaround time. Ironically, training actually becomes simpler. If somebody's having to learn everything that you possibly need to know about DITA and XML, there's a lot of training involved, and you will have 2 or 3 people on the team who kind of need to know where the spark plugs are, how to change the oil, do that sort of stuff. Everybody else is going to get in the car, turn the key, drive the steering wheel, and they'll be using automatic transmission. They don't know what a shift is because they're not doing it. So basically, as a result of that, there's actually in some ways less to learn than if somebody was creating content the old-fashioned way with format-driven content.
Gotcha.
So hopefully I answer your question to some degree there, but the main thing is to have a realistic time frame in terms of completion of when the big kahuna comes in on ROI.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Connie, do you want to jump in with our final question? Then we've got about 10 minutes or so, 15 at most, but if you want to jump in there and see if we'll grab some of the questions that were submitted as well.
Okay. Well, I guess the last question is sort of in a nutshell, could you give us the one piece of advice to an organization, to a team that's thinking about starting to move towards XML and DITA? What's the one thing that you would tell them to make that process less painful?
Absolutely. I can think of 3 things, but I'll pick the strongest one. And I think this would apply to almost anybody. That's why I'm going to pick this one. I would say that the most important one thing is to actually have a realistic hands-on simulation before you start development. In other words, don't approach the project by, okay, we're going to have this qualified person create all of these files, all of these cascading style sheets or whatever you happen to be using, XSLT or something. We're going to have somebody create all of these files that are going to give us really nifty formatting, and then we're all going to come back in here 2 months from now and try it out. Okay? Well, there are several reasons that you don't want to do that. One of them is God knows what's going to happen. Who knows what this person might develop that isn't quite doing what you want it to, because everybody can't be having hands-on with it. And secondly, it's a lot. Again, I'm using this analogy of test driving a car. If you're going to purchase a vehicle, or let's even say you're trying out public transportation for that matter, buy a bicycle or a car, you need to physically get behind the wheel to determine many things about your comfort level with it. One of them is, does it have good sight lines? In this car, can I turn around and do I not have a sail panel behind the rear passenger that's blocking a truck? That did used to happen with older cars. Can I, at a glance, see everything that I need to see? Does it handle well? Does it feel safe? That type of thing. And so if the very first step is for people to go ahead and actually just create some content, even if it's just bogus content that you're not going to do anything with, but actually physically go through first an authoring process, and then perhaps a review process, and then perhaps publish whatever it is you've created, publish it out to multiple formats. Have it go out to PDF and print. See if you can also go out to EPUB, responsive HTML, etc. Go ahead and just go through that actual authoring process first. And then through that, that's what's going to trigger the discovery process on what you want and need to change in your content. A close number 2 that I'll throw in real quick would be cleaning up your content before you do the migration. That is often a mistake where people will just take files, whatever way they were created, and try to feed them to a funnel and have it turn into XML and DITA. And you can have an amazing amount of garbage that has to be stripped out of there. Footnote on the bottom of that is this is like the bonus question. When you reach the point that you know that you're definitely going to migrate to XML and you're going to migrate to DITA, take a really close look at all of your content and ask the question, is this nice to know or is this need to know? In other words, do we really need this content here? A lot of times it's kind of like having a pot roast full of fat, with big ribbons of, I don't eat meat, but big ribbons of fat or something has to be cut off, like a prime rib or something. A lot of document has got layers of air, empty calories, filler, whatever you want to call it, and that's a really good time to chop that stuff off and get rid of it, is when you do that migration. In other words, don't carry those old leftovers in the refrigerator over. You don't want to take the same old meatloaf in the Pyrex pan and just reshape it into a different shape. Get rid of what you don't need and hang on to what you do need. Because a lot of times there's some legacy content that goes back 10 or 15 years and people don't even know why it's there. It just is.
All right, clean first, structure it, know where you're going. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. We have a ton of questions that were submitted. We knew we weren't going to get to all of them.
Okay.
This one's neat, and this one might be, if it's too big for the 9 minutes we have, minus the closing, but it's interesting. So any brief tips? My department's migrating to XML, and we create online, I think the CHM files, printed manuals, and product data sheets. Do you have any tips about how to structure the repository? Every topic in a single folder could quickly turn into a mess, but I feel like we're seeing an advantage of DITA and XML if we create chapter folders. Any advice? So this one's not quite technical, but it's a lot of them, and we're going to do our best to answer these. A lot of these questions we will certainly answer in written form, but this one felt like there might be at least advantages or disadvantages for each one of those.
Sure, I would say, of course, there's the old cop-out answer. Naturally, I need to see your content. Whenever you deal with people talking about DITA or XML at most conferences, the cop-out answer is, well, we'll take this on a case-by-case basis, and if you'll let me come in and examine your files, then I can tell you why you should buy from me. But to try to give you, with the amount of information that I do have, I would say probably dividing things somewhat on a chapter basis may make sense, as long as all that information is really closely related within the chapter. If it's not necessarily chapter in the sense of a book chapter, but it's really more a chunk of knowledge that's related. Which might be a quick start guide or setup, testing, reloading supplies, whatever. If you've got some sort of a category that's closely related, it could make sense to have that information tied together. One thing that, in terms of a repository or in terms of how you might organize your file structure, is something that people often discover is if you do have something that's close to, if you have something similar to cautions and warnings, that type of thing. I just have to cough for a moment. Excuse me. If you have a lot of cautions and warnings with older authoring methods, cautions and warnings were kind of islands that sort of just floated down the page. You thought of it as sort of a square of text or something. So our thinking process when it was page and paper based would be to have something like, okay, now I'm going to drop in the caution and the warning. And when you think about it, probably all of those cautions and warnings are very, very similar and very closely related. Some of them are quite repetitious. So an obvious folder, if you want to call it, or a place to tie some information together that's related would be things like cautions and warnings. Those. Another thing would be, I would refer to them as side notes. But if you are doing something that's more paper-based or print-based, and to some degree, this could be true of a HAT, help authoring tool, as well. Sometimes another thing would be what you think of as tips. This is a tip or an advanced feature. Those are not always real specific to the topic at hand. Some of those tips are rather generic, or they can be used in multiple places. So that's another place where you might want to have that all stored in one place, so that you basically author once, publish many.
Very nice.
I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, and Jill's been able to capture some of that, and there's a lot of questions here that we're going to address via the written form of this.
Okay.
When do we go? What's the migrate from HAT to XML DITA? When's the right time to make the move? We do have a really, on TechWhirl, we have our DITA portal. You can find it through the menu, kind of go down to DITA. We have a making the business case there and a number of tools, but we'll also try to give some written answers there. So we are going to ask, given you are the evangelist for Adobe,
Sure.
So what things can Adobe do to help with this migration? And we got about, probably this is the elevator pitch, and we'll certainly be able to elaborate a little bit more.
Sure, absolutely. Well, obviously a number of things, but I would say this, and I'm going for a moment. I'm going to stop being an Adobe employee, and I'm going to go back in time 2 years ago when I was working for translation agencies, and I was working with multiple tools, not just with Framemaker or with Adobe. What Adobe can do with TechCom Suite and specifically with Framemaker, which is most closely tied to XML. Framemaker, of course, will author natively in XML and DITA, or you can work without structure. Because Framemaker is a very unique authoring tool in that it's possible to start out unstructured. Some people in unstructured or regular Framemaker, some people think of that as Microsoft Word on steroids. You know, very, very strong, well tied together documents that are format based, but you do have some rules that limit what you can do. Those files can convert very, very easily to XML or DITA. They're built-in tools that will actually create a conversion table for you automatically. In fact, I believe that one of the resources that I've shared with Connie that will be visually available somewhere is a recent recorded webinar we had about convert to structure. That actually goes through what the physical steps are to do that. So that's one thing that it really does. Another thing that's very important is when you're publishing from Framemaker, even if you start out unstructured or after you are in XML and DITA, Framemaker now has something radically new that we added in the latest release, Framemaker 12. It has an actual publish function that is, think of publish as going beyond print. For decades, Framemaker would allow you to print to PDF or paper. And then with TechCom Suite, it was possible to tie Framemaker files into RoboHelp and then from there go to 17 different formats, not just EPUB, Kindle, and single source layout HTML5. You could even go to something like Oracle Help or Eclipse, you know, some kind of older formats like that. Now Framemaker by itself will instantly publish out to 5 of the most common online formats. So you can publish to EPUB, Kindle, HTML5, Web Help. So you basically just out of the box, this is all built into it, and that's one of the things that helps the most. The other thing is that the Framemaker and TechCom Suite out of the box has got really good common XML and DITA structures in it. So there's an application for DITA 1.2 where you can create concepts, topics, DITA maps, whatever you wish, and basically it has very pleasing formatting built in. So if I had to kind of summarize what's the number one thing that our product brings to you, is it drastically reduces the amount of time, the amount of development time that somebody might have to invest in creating format style sheets. Many other tools which are more traditional, the method of creating formatting is more labor intensive than that with Framemaker, and the tools are more familiar. And then finally, there's a huge pool of Framemaker users out there. So even if somebody has never used DITA or XML before, if they've ever used Framemaker, they know what they need to do to create what becomes the structured template and what controls all that formatting.
Right on, right on. Yeah, it's a training, the community, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. So we knew we were going to run out of time.
Yep.
We knew that sans a DeLorean.
Yeah.
And a little bit of lightning. There was no way we were going to be able to go through here. So we are going to get Maxwell to do some written answers. We've said that a few times, but we promise you, if by some chance you want to catch the technical communication folks, they are on the road. The autumn and the conference season is upon us. TC UK in Brighton, United Kingdom, September 16th to 18th. CIDM in Stevenson, Washington, the 22nd to the 24th. LavaCon, which TechWhirl will also be there as well, in Portland, your fair city, October 13th to 15th. Also doing the Adobe Day, which is on the 12th. This is a free event. We've had the opportunity to go and cover this a number of times. If you're coming in the LavaCon, go to the Adobe Day. You get to see a lot of the folks that will also be presenting at LavaCon, but they're there to present additional materials, and are also little looser days, so you can ask them some questions as well. So you can find that link on TechWhirl. You can also find the link on Adobe's TCS5 blog. Information Development World, which we're also going to, that's in San Jose later in October, and then TCOM over in Germany, 11th to the 13th. So you will be able to find the Adobe folks. They may be a little tired, they may not know where they're at, but they will be able to answer your questions on XML and DITA and anything else about the suite. We do encourage you to ask the questions on this. This is the ROI on this. This formatting is quite good. It will help increase the quality. It will increase your speed to results. You'll be able to make changes faster. So XML and DITA is absolutely something we would encourage everyone investigating and looking at the Adobe TCS5 suite if you're making that move. Talk to the folks, get all the information before you ever make a decision. But it is a world leader for a reason, and we do encourage you to check out one of our partners and do that. Maxwell, thank you so much for taking time to answer our questions and spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Certainly get you to answer some of those other questions. We will have you back next month as well for a different Fast 5. We'll be promoting that. It's going to be on The Hitchhiker's Guide to XML Authoring, so a little bit of a different swing, some case studies that were drafted, and we'll get more information out. Jill, thank you for the copious notes and for getting everything out there. Those notes we're going to leave for everybody who were following this and wanted to kind of grab the Cliff Notes version. And Connie, thank you again for joining us, asking questions.
Great. Well, now, look, if I could make one closing remark, I wanted to encourage everybody, particularly to come to the next session, because it's not just me, Maxwell Hoffmann, but my good buddy and somebody who I think knows 10 times what I do, Chris Despopoulos, who created the CUD span utilities. He's been involved with Framemaker for over 20 years. Helped write the documentation back in the day before Adobe came along. And Chris is based in Europe, but he is very rarely seen. He only does 1 or 2 conferences a year, so this is a very rare opportunity to kind of see the man behind the curtain in the Wizard Box.
Agreed, yes, and thank you for adding that. I hadn't had that on the script, and I went, wait, we're doing this in October as well. So yes, thank you for that. We'll be promoting, and Chris was kind enough to jump in, and we're really excited for that session as well.
Yeah.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining us, watching this. For Connie and myself, everyone at TechWhirl, thank you for watching, and have a great day. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.